The stairs groaned under my weight like the brittle bones of something long dead, each step protesting as I hauled the last box up to the 5th floor. The air was thick not just with the damp, mildewed scent of an old building, but with something else, something sour and metallic that caught in my throat and made my stomach clench. Apartment 4B sat at the end of a narrow hallway. Its door painted a sickly shade of green that was peeling at the edges like diseased skin. Water stains sprawled across the ceiling like forgotten continents, their brown edges suggesting years of neglect, of leaks ignored and problems left to fester. I fished the keys from my pocket, my hands trembling slightly not just from the exhaustion of moving, but from something deeper, a gnawing anxiety that had been my constant companion for months. $400 a month for this place was a steal, the kind of deal that seemed too good to be true. Standing there in that dim, flickering corridor, I was starting to understand why. The fluorescent light above buzzed erratically, casting jittery, uneven shadows on the cracked walls. It flickered in a strange, almost rhythmic pattern, 3 quick pulses. Then darkness, then 3 more, like Morse code I couldn't decipher. The lock stuck at first, resisting me for a moment before, giving way with a grinding click that echoed down the empty hallway. The door swung open with a low, creaking moan, revealing my new home, a cramped studio with yellowed walls and carpet that had seen better decades. The previous tenant had left faint outlines on the floor, where furniture once stood darker patches. That reminded me of crime scene chalk marks, as if something had been removed in a hurry. Perhaps something had happened there. It was mine now, and more importantly, it was all I could afford with my mountain of student debt threatening to crush me. I set the box down beside the others and surveyed the space that would be my prison and my salvation. The kitchenette huddled in one corner, its cabinet doors hanging slightly askew like broken wings. The laminate countertop was bubbled and peeling in spots, revealing the particle board beneath, a sad testament to years of wear and neglect. The sink dripped steadily, each metallic plink seeming to grow louder in the oppressive silence, as if the building itself was whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. The single window overlooked an alley where garbage cans clustered like metal mushrooms, their lids askew, spilling refuse onto the cracked asphalt below. The smell of something rotten and damp seeped in through the gaps in the frame, mixing with the stale air of the apartment. The bathroom door was ajar, revealing cracked tiles that had once been white but now bore the yellow-brown stains of age and neglect. A mirror hung above the sink, its surface reflecting the room with unsettling clarity, as if it were watching rather than simply showing. There was something about that reflection that bothered me, not for what it showed, but for how it showed. The angles were slightly off, the proportions just a little too stretched, as if the mirror itself were distorting reality. It made everything appear subtly wrong, like a funhouse mirror that warped the world just enough to make my skin crawl. As I began to unpack, I spun around suddenly, nearly knocking over the box at my feet. A woman stood in my doorway, and every instinct the first possessed screamed danger. She was pale, not just fair-skinned, but pale in a way that suggested something vital was missing, as if the life had been slowly drained from her. Pulled back in a tight bun that seemed to stretch her skin unnaturally, making her features appear sharper than they should have been. But it was her smile that made my stomach twist into knots. It stretched too far, her lips taut like wet canvas stretched over a frame too large for it, as if her face might split at any moment. "I'm Clara," she said, her voice oddly melodic, like she was reciting lines from a play she'd performed 1,000 times. Each syllable was precisely measured, almost rehearsed, with an underlying quality that reminded me of a recording played through old crackling speakers. "I live down the hall. You'll like it here, Elliot." A cold chill ran down my spine. Had never told her my name. Maybe it was on the lease paperwork. I tried to rationalize, but even as the thought crossed my mind, her unblinking stare made my stomach clench with primal fear. Her eyes were gray, almost colorless like old clouded glass, and they didn't seem to move when she blinked, just a mechanical, unsettling motion that reminded me of a doll's eyes, lifeless and fixed. "Thanks," I managed, forcing a smile. That felt like plastic on my face. "I'm sure I will." She tilted her head at an unnatural angle, like a bird studying its prey before striking. The movement was too sharp, too sudden, accompanied by a faint crackling sound that might have been her neck or might have been something else entirely. "The building has its own rhythm," she said, her smile never wavering, never faltering. "Fixed in place like a mask, you'll learn. Welcome home, Elliot." She glided away with steps that made no sound on the creaking floorboards, leaving me standing there with goosebumps crawling up my arms like insects. Her footsteps, or lack thereof, bothered me almost as much as everything else about her. The building's floors groaned under my weight, protested every movement, yet she moved as if she weighed nothing at all. I shook it off and returned to my boxers, telling myself that old buildings attracted odd tenants. Probably just a lonely neighbor trying to be friendly, albeit in the most unsettling way possible. But something about the way she'd said my name lingered in my mind like an echo I couldn't quite shake. 20 minutes later, there was a knock. That made me jump. The delivery guy from the moving company stood in the hallway, holding the last of my boxers. He was young, maybe my age, but his face was pale, and his eyes kept darting down the hall like he expected something to lunge at him from the shadows. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the building's chill, and his hand shook slightly as he held the boxes. "Last of your stuff," he said, shoving the boxes at me with more force than necessary. His voice cracked slightly, betraying his nervousness. He glanced past my shoulder into the apartment, then back down the corridor, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. "Man, this place gives me the creeps. Bad vibes, you know, like seriously bad vibes." I followed his gaze and felt my blood. Turned to ice, Clara stood at the far end of the hall, motionless as a statue, watching us. Even from that distance, I could see that unsettling smile splitting her pale face. She didn't wave or acknowledge us in any way, just stared with that mechanical stillness, her head tilted at that same unnatural angle. "She's just a neighbor," I said, though my voice sounded less certain than I intended. A nervous laugh escaped me, falling flat in the stale air. "Yeah, well, ... He shook his head, already backing toward the stairs with obvious relief. "Good luck with that, man. Seriously, you're gonna need it." He practically ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time, his footsteps echoing like gunshots in the narrow stairwell. I pulled the boxes inside and closed the door, turning the deadbolt with more force than necessary. The sound of the lock engaging was reassuring, solid, and real in a way that made me feel slightly safer. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive, like the building itself was holding its breath. I told myself it was just the weight of old concrete and neglect, just a strange neighbor and a skittish delivery guy. Nothing to worry about, but as I unpacked my clothes, small things began to bother me. The hallway light continued its bizarre pattern, 3 quick pulses, then darkness, then 3 more. The rhythm was so precise it couldn't be random electrical issues. When I paused to listen, a whisper seemed to drift from the heating vent, soft and unintelligible, curling through the air like smoke. I pressed my ear against the metal grate, heard only the building's distant groans and the sound of my own rapid heartbeat then. My keys slipped from their hook on the wall, hitting the floor with a metallic clatter that made me jump out of my skin. I hadn't touched them. I was across the room, unpacking books. The hook was secure, screwed firmly into the drywall with no sign of loosening. I hung them again, testing the hook's stability with increasing agitation. It didn't budge as solid as a rock, yet the incident left me deeply uneasy. I was stressed, that was all. Anyone would be jumpy in my situation. The new job at the design firm downtown was my last shot at a decent salary, my only chance to dig myself out of the financial hole I'd been trapped in since graduation. 3 years of freelancing had barely kept me afloat, scraping by on logo designs and website mock-ups that paid pennies. This new position was precarious, a 3-month trial period before they decided whether to keep me. One mistake, one missed deadline, one client complaint. I'd be back to ramen noodles and overdue notices. My phone buzzed with an email. From my supervisor, "Great work on the Morrison project. Looking forward to seeing what you can do next." The words should have filled me with relief, but they felt hollow in that dim room with its peeling walls and oppressive atmosphere. I'd spent 18 hours on those designs, hunched over my tablet, until my spine felt like it might snap, surviving on coffee and sheer determination. As I bent to plug in my laptop, something extraordinary happened. The persistent ache in my lower back, the one that had plagued me for months from hunching, overdrawing tablets, simply vanished. The relief was so sudden and complete that I froze, waiting for the familiar stab of pain to return. I straightened experimentally, twisted my spine, stretched my arms overhead. Nothing. For the first time in months, my back felt perfectly normal. As if years of poor posture had been magically erased, I finished unpacking as darkness settled over the city, like a heavy blanket. Through the window, I watched the alley transform into a canyon of shadows, punctuated only by a single flickering streetlight that cast dancing shadows on the brick walls. The apartment felt smaller in the darkness, the shadows deeper and more substantial, as if they were entities unto themselves. At 11:30, as I was brushing my teeth with water that tasted faintly metallic, I heard a low hum emanating from somewhere within the walls themselves. It started as a barely perceptible vibration, then grew stronger, a pulse that seemed to match my heartbeat with disturbing precision. The sound made my teeth ache and my skull throb, as if something were trying to drill its way out from the inside. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to locate the source of the unsettling noise. The hum seemed to move, shifting from the kitchen to the living area, like something alive crawling through the building's skeleton. It wasn't mechanical, not a pipe or a furnace or any sort of equipment I could identify. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic, almost like a voice chanting just below the threshold of human hearing. When I checked my apartment door one final time before bed, my blood turned to ice. It was open just a crack, maybe an inch, but I distinctly remembered locking it after the delivery. The deadbolt was still engaged, yet somehow the door had drifted ajar on its own. Cool air seeped through the gap, carrying that same sour smell from the hallway, more intense now, almost suffocating in its wrongness. I closed the door firmly, checking the lock twice before wedging a chair under the handle for good measure. The hum faded gradually, leaving only the building's ordinary nighttime soundpipes settling, floors creaking, the distant murmur of other lives behind thin walls. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Old buildings made noises, doors sometimes drifted if they weren't properly aligned. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay in my unfamiliar bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and wondered what I had gotten myself into. The rent was too cheap for a reason. The neighbors were wrong in ways I couldn't articulate, and somewhere in the building's depths, something had hummed with patient, predatory intent. Tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow, I would look for somewhere else, somewhere normal, but even as I thought it, I knew I wouldn't. I couldn't afford to. This place might have been wrong in ways I didn't yet understand, but it was mine, and my back pain was gone for the first time in months. Something was watching from the darkness, beyond my door, patient, eternal, and utterly inhuman, and I was beginning to understand that leaving might not be an option anymore.